Perfect.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, the subtitle here is that this is part three of the series in orchestrating sustainable transformations. And we'll get to intros and what we do, but we are very big on long-term sustainable change for organizations. And we have two previous installations in this series. And this is actually the second-ish time, second, third-ish time that we've run this session, and we've seen such demand for it that we are delighted to do it again for the folks who are in the session today. Um, let's see. So for intros, my name is Bob Turnus. I'm lucky enough to know a lot of the folks who've joined today. I see some familiar faces. I've been in the lean and agile space about 15 years, working for software organizations as well as with management consulting companies. I am so delighted to kind of live at this intersection of technology, process, and good intent to help create sustainable change within organizations that affects not just the companies, but really the lives of the people within them. And I'm lucky to be joined by and supported today by Mike McCalla. We'll be co-presenting our topic today. And Mike, I'll kick it over to you for an intro.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm the president and founder of Lean Agile Intelligence. We'll get a little bit into that. But about myself, I too have been in the quote unquote transformation space for about 18 years now. A bit of a data nerd, believe the power of data to tell a story and draw alignment, which has a lot to do with what the topic is today. So thank you for attending, and hopefully we can give you something today that you can walk away with and something practical that can help you in your change agent efforts.
Great. Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. So for some light context, we make a tool called Lean Agile Intelligence, or LAI for short. And what Mike said just a moment ago, I really want to anchor in on that. Our goal today is to deliver wisdom, to give back to the community, and to give you something that's portable and can be used whatever your context, whether you're using our tool or not. And so we're going to sprinkle some LAI specific goodness throughout especially the later parts of this presentation. That said, it is hardly a commercial. That said, we did a webinar a couple of months ago. We were really focused on process, and Keith, it was probably one of the first two installations or installments of this topic that you just asked about. We will send you a follow-up email with those earlier webinars. And so we finished, and at the end, one of our participants asked, what is LAI? You guys keep referring to it, but what do you guys actually do? And we thought to ourselves, we talk so much about process and mindsets and change. We kind of forgot how to talk about how we monetize. And so we're going to be kind of walking that tightrope again today, delivering lots of platform agnostic goodness with some platform specific sprinkles. And so in short, we have created an assessment and improvement platform. It first assesses the current state of modern ways of working. This could be lean and agile, as you see in our name. It could be product. It could be anything else. And then we provide resources as well as tools for change agents to drive real improvements. And so in the context of this webinar, we're an enabler that lets those same change agents drive the narrative with data. In fact, we met with a leader last week, and Mike, I've been out for a few days. Maybe there's a more recent example, but on almost a daily basis, we are talking to companies who say things like, after seeing the first results from their organization, this leader said, okay, there's really no surprises here. However, now I can point to something accurate that I can use to then drive change within their organization. So there's also some real big ahas that organizations also get by doing a deep dive, not just using the plural of anecdote, which is not data, but instead real signal on current state as well as change within their spaces. So that's our tool. I'll be offering a free trial at the conclusion of our session, but hopefully that sets a baseline for what it is that kind of keeps our lights on. So now that we're done talking about us, let's talk about you guys. Let's talk about what you're going to learn, as well as today's learning objectives or LOs. We'll talk about the role that behaviors play in transformation. We'll talk about an approach, not the approach, but an approach to changing behaviors. And then there's the whys and hows of making behavior visible. And Mike, I'll pass it over to you for the next few slides.
Thanks, Bob. Before we jump into today's session, I think it's important to provide a little bit of context on what we mean by orchestrating sustainable transformation. So let's double click on each one of those words. So when we talk about orchestrating, we're talking about strategically influencing stakeholders, being able to drive alignment across the different components of an organization, being very strategic on how we do that, inviting people to participate in the change, not necessarily inflicting change on them, being able to explain things and be able to articulate them and drive change using experiments. So that's what we mean by orchestrating. Sustainable is we want to make it sticky. We want it to last over time. We wanted to make it part of the organization's DNA. And then finally, transformation. For us at LAI, transformation is not a transactional one-time event. It's a continuous evolution of adopting new ways of working that is benefit to the people in the system, the customers that consume the product, and the business as a whole. So that's what we mean by orchestrating sustainable transformation. And we'll come back to that quite a few times. As far as the first two parts of this series, and yes, they are available on our YouTube channel, so please go check that out. They really focused on kind of setting the stage from a narrative on how you talk about change, how you can drive and orchestrate it. Today's session really goes a level deeper in how do we actually help impact behaviors. And so as we jump into this, you're going to see a unique approach on how you make them visible, how you measure them, that we think it can be something different, given our experience, to help drive the strategic conversations. So Bob, you can go to the next slide. All right, so just everything anchors to there's a theme across all three of these. So it's important that we go through just real fast, the summary of the first two. So the first thing was business outcomes. Is your organization questioning the value of agility? And folks, organization leaders are accountable for organizational performance, whether that be reporting to the street, reporting to the board, etc. I can promise you, whether you implement Scrum, Safe, Kanban, that is not what keeps them up at night, okay? And so it's more or less, are we generating more revenue? Are we hitting our estimates? Are we saving on a cost perspective? And are we mitigating the risk that in the environment that we work within? So the better approach, and I think a lot of us on here, I see a lot of these names that I see a lot, and I think we all can attest to a better approach than implementing a framework. And there's nothing wrong with frameworks, but is really first leading with the business goals and ensuring that there's an understanding that Agile is an enabler to achieve those business goals. So for example, my guess is your organization is exploring ways to use AI to help save cost. Okay, so if you look at the screen here at the bottom here, if I start at the very bottom, not the very bottom, but that yellow line, right? The business goal is cost savings. Okay, well, how do we get that? What do we need to do from an operational perspective to achieve that? Well, we need to be able to deliver high value. Okay, we need to be able to identify the use cases, right, within AI that are going to be saving the most cost and delivering the most value to our business as well as our customers. Well, then what is the technique that was going to allow us to do that? And as we know, product discovery is very important these days, where you're applying an empirical process to the product, to deciding what to build, right? And being able to decide, are we going to we need to iterate, learn quickly, fail fast, right, and be able to respond to change. These are all very agile-like practices, folks. However, the driver was cost savings, the AI implementation, delivering high value, ultimately then landing at the practice or behavior in the case of today. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks so much, Mike. Um, so let's talk a little bit about metrics and indicators, and the concept of leading and lagging indicators. And when a lot of folks, and this is a bit of a reframe for folks, when leaders, organizations think about metrics, they're often thinking about quantitative metrics, things like team velocity, profitability is a quantitative metric. In the software world, we could think about like percent of committed features that get delivered. We could think about percent of delivered features being used by a customer. These are all lagging indicators. They're certainly useful, but they're really useful in afterwards, right? Ex post facto, they are oftentimes they're descriptive, but not necessarily explanatory for how even those metrics themselves arrived. And so we are really interested in kind of shifting our thinking pretty far left into leading indicators. And in that fashion, we're looking primarily at qualitative indicators, things that describe the system. The benefit to these is that they provide early signals on process towards the outcome. Oftentimes these things are going to be behavioral in nature, right? They are talking about all the conditions of a system that lead to a specific outcome, right? If you're looking for profitability, that starts all the way back to P&L, right? And the cost centers that drive towards that, as well as the opportunities and the prioritization of the opportunities that filter into the work that gets done. The challenge with leading indicators is that, yeah, they have a lot of promise, but they require a really thorough understanding of the system and process and the people within it. There is a strong benefit to looking at these, though. These types of leading indicators, these qualitative indicators, that helps you understand the human and cultural aspects of transformations. They provide insights on the why things are happening. Again, they're not just explanatory. They're not just descriptive, rather, but they are also explanatory. And these qualitative metric indicators, they're really used as leading indicators for the success and failures that leaders really care about, to Mike's point earlier. So a little bit of taxonomy just to set the table here. We're going to talk a lot about transformation in this particular session. And as we are defining it, transformation is the continuous evolution of how work is done, how value is created and delivered, and then how individuals and groups, including teams and groups at scale, will improve. And so that's kind of the why, but let's dig into the how. Now, a really common target for leaders to change are processes. And oftentimes that looks like a framework. Like, let's throw a framework at something. I'm sure there's a framework out there. It's like, what's that old joke? It's like, the great thing about standards is that there are so many of them. Well, the great thing about frameworks is that there's always something that you can choose. New joke for you, Mike. So, here are the frameworks, and seeing the names on the screen or in our participant list, here are the frameworks, right, that we all know and I think mostly love. There is SAFe, there's Scrum, there's Kanban, and there's a ton more. Some are loved more than others, but they certainly all hold a place within our space. These frameworks often get paired with technology to both support them and then also reinforce the discipline. And that looks like Jira and Miro and Teams and Rally and PlanView and Azure DevOps, etc. But what about including, like, from a systems level perspective, people? How do we systematically, not even assessing and changing behaviors, but even merely tracking behaviors. And because these are some of the foundational elements of a culture, here are some of the examples of decision making that you'd want to, of behaviors that you'd want to look at: decision making, collaboration, and safety, generally psychological. And we're really all here today because the really the biggest sticking point for transformations, and this is backed up by industry studies, is that the biggest challenge exists on this latter part. So let's take a look at what does the industry say, right? I've just said, hey, this is all backed up by industry. What does industry actually say? Here are the stats on transformations as a whole. I love this slide. These stats, they're terrible. It shows that BCG says that 30% of digital transformations succeed, which is to me a terrible number, or it's at least it's pretty pessimistic. McKinsey and Company has like the same stat flipped around, which is that 70% of transformations fail. So 30% succeed, 70% fail, and then Bain and Company is even more cynical and says that 88% fail to achieve original ambitions. Okay, that's kind of, it is descriptive, but it's not explanatory. And what does BCG say? Boston Consulting Group says that one of the key factors for transformation success is skipping ahead, behavioral change. BCG says that behavior is one of the key factors. McKinsey says something very similar, which is that employee resistance and behavior is the major barrier. Bain, same. If you guys are surely seeing a through line here, which is that Bain says transformation requires critical changes to corporate behaviors. And as we kind of dive into the why, let's look at how transformations typically play out in organizations. So leaders often look at technology and tools, processes, right, frameworks and otherwise, as the things that they kind of focus more on. Now, I can't blame, and there's no clear failure pattern in doing so. This is the right place to start. These things are the easiest to implement. They're also the easiest to kind of monitor and, to use a word, govern. They create these really easy, visible components of change. I'm just calling out some attributes of agile practices here, but these could be, folks, this could be anything. Is it really any change? Now, these initiatives really rarely focus on behaviors. We've chosen this graphic. This is thanks to Prima and our graphic artists to putting this slide together. This is a perfect kind of visual for what this looks like. The stuff, the top of the iceberg, the stuff you see above the waterline, that's clearly the stuff. But as those consulting shops just called out, it's the lion's share. It is like the below the waterline iceberg of behaviors and people. Those are the invisible things, and they're some of the trickiest to manage. These things are difficult to address. I have a lot of empathy for all transformations. This is the stuff that, Mike, our team here, we see on a daily basis, and we all know from helping support hundreds to thousands of transformations over our careers. These things are tricky. And here are some examples. You've probably seen these in your careers. Questions like, are priorities, are they truly clear and followed? Do they make sense? They have good reasons why priorities exist. Are decisions made quickly and consistently? And then are they adhered to and followed? Or are they instead revisited because there are questions about legitimacy of that decision? Are teams collaborating across silos? Classic. And are organizations, whether it's in an agile fashion or otherwise, are they responding to change and intelligence and information versus just sticking to a plan? So this leads us to some observations. Leaders oftentimes kind of incorrectly assume that technology, meaning tools and process, are going to drive behaviors, right? Um, this is a false premise. And it's much more accurate to say that while tech and process impact behavior, that impact is marginal. And Mike, it's funny, when we were building these slides, I had a reckoning with myself on this topic, and I thought, this can't be true, right? And then I thought to myself, like, we so frequently talk to organizations, and I feel like this is a commiseration session with the folks on this, in the attendees. Like, how many times do we talk to companies and they're like, yeah, we've been doing agility, we've been doing agile practices for 3 years. Our teams still struggle with writing good user stories or vertically slicing them. Our leaders, right, that frozen middle, still have issues or prioritize, maybe based on gut feelings. And so, beyond behaviors that don't comport with a process, there's another layer of behaviors that require good teamwork and create trust and psychological safety. And there are really very few processes and frameworks, honestly, that directly address those behaviors, which are, just as an aside, like, those are the elements of culture. And so if you've heard your story anywhere in what I've just described, let's talk afterwards. There's a lifeline that we can throw you here. But by touching on culture, we're really describing another topic, and that is the system. I'll read this here. The system is the set of conditions that determine how people interpret, adapt, and respond within their environment. This includes the structures, incentives, norms, the personalities, and informal networks. And so it brings us to another observation, is that the system is maybe not the most direct, but absolutely the strongest driver of behaviors. And more observations is that direct commands to change behaviors can be ignored. They can feel temporary. They can even backfire. But instead, a system that incentivizes desired behavior and creates intrinsic and extrinsic deterrence for undesired behavior, that creates the most lasting change for behaviors. And so your challenge as leaders and change agents is to influence that system. Mike, I know this is a favorite topic for you. Any thoughts on this before we move to our next slide?
Uh, no, Bob, actually, I think you hit it. The only thing that I would add here is the system's very complex, right? And we're up against the system in these organizations. And I think that's what makes the task so daunting. You can't control the system. So what levers do you pull to really drive the change? So we're going to talk a lot about that going forward.
Stuff. Thank you, Mike. So this brings us to our first poll. And we're so curious. Thanks, folks, for mentioning your location earlier in the chat. Hopefully that primed you up for a little interaction. Love your answers on this poll. How well do the behaviors in your organization reflect agile ways of working? And check out the descriptions here between fully aligned, partially aligned, not yet aligned, or even unsure. And we'll give this about 45 seconds for folks to read and respond.
Bob, I'm going to transition and share my screen, okay?
You got it. And if you haven't seen it, this is a separate window that's popped up as part of the Zoom experience. Ooh, and we see great participation. Yeah, there's partial alignment, right? We see a lot of progress. Perfection is still out there for some folks, or better said, kind of what we all want to achieve. Hopefully the content that we're presenting today gets you there. And by the way, great interaction and really great dialogue in the chat already. Um, so thanks for the participation on the poll. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Bob. Now we're going to transition into the more of the solution, right, or an approach, as Bob said. And I just want to, congratulate 20 of you for making baby steps and having some partial alignment. So congratulations on helping orchestrate that. Um, so we've highlighted really at a very high level and about how behaviors ultimately help drive the transformation. And I was following some of the chat, and again, thanks for engaging. I think we include leadership behaviors in there, like from a people perspective. So it sounds like a lot of you are experiencing that challenge of the behaviors not being congruent to the way we want to work, right? So the $1 million question, or the big question is, well, then how in the world do we influence the system? We've just talked about how complex it is, right? We've talked about VUCA and how business environments refuse to stop, right? So how in the world do we drive the right behaviors as change agents? And we're going to go through an approach that uses a survey-esque approach. But at the core of that approach is some guiding principles. Number one, it's hard to change what you cannot see, right? So we need to make behaviors visible to be able to drive those strategic conversations, have evidence of what we're talking about. We all know and feel and sense like there's some dysfunction, right? But when you have that conversation, is there evidence and data to help drive that? Kind of like what Bob was talking about in a conversation we had just yesterday with a pilot going on. So, well, there's really not any surprises here, but man, I now have the data and the evidence to drive conversations with my peers and my leaders. Okay. So really being able to make something tangible that's really hard to see, like behaviors and transformation, helps with the conversation. It keeps it anchored. Number two, tie behaviors to strategic outcomes. This comes back to what we talked about in the beginning. Don't lead with frameworks. Lead with, what are your business objectives? What do you then need to do to achieve those business objectives? Right? The answer most of the time will be, hey, we need to, from an AI perspective, we talked about AI implementation. What behaviors do we need to be successful in doing that so we can save costs? Well, we need to do product discovery well. Right? Designers and developers and product have to work together and collaborate. We need to be able to learn quickly, make fast decisions, run small experiments. These are all very Agile-esque practices and behaviors, but it's all tied to something. It's all tied to a strategic outcome. You typically will have the attention of folks when you start to talk about it in that way. Ultimately, and we all know this, what ends up happening is this will help us identify the system barriers, right, that are constraining us from getting better at this. And so, for example, we recently had a client that had teams that were pretty high performing, predictable, flow metrics were going up, but they didn't necessarily see the business gains from their transformation. But ultimately, when they ran in, one of these surveys, what ultimately came about of it wasn't necessarily a team problem, it was a system problem. And work was kind of coming through the side door. And as a result of that, and teams weren't working on the right things, as a result of that, they implemented a lean portfolio management. So that's a system change that we start to see with the supporting data to help drive the conversation and being able to tie it to a business goal of theirs. They were able to make that change, which was a lever they can pull at the system level. The other thing is you need to be intentional about these changes. As soon as you kind of sweep them under the rug, you don't keep them front and center in conversation, they tend to go back under that waterline. So we need to keep them front and center and continuously remind people about this. Change management. Continuous measure and adapt. Everything we do in Agile, we should always inspect and adapt as an empirical process, measure what we've learned, and then adapt on based off of how we want to proceed. All right. Although we said there's some guiding principles, we will say that first one, make behaviors visible, is really a prerequisite step. Again, you cannot change what you cannot see. So we need to shine the light on those behaviors that are impeding our progress, that are ultimately impeding us from achieving our business goals. Now, one thing we do have going for us from a change agent perspective is the very nature of behavior. So behaviors are specific. Here's what we're looking for in this situation. They're observable, right? We can see them in action. And they're also repeatable. They can be done the same way each and every time. And so because it's defined in that manner, this allows us to measure it qualitatively, which is simply just assessing the degree which the quality of something exists, right? You're quantifying a quality, for lack of a better term. Um, and we're able to see to what extent does this behavior show up in our organization and how strong and consistent it is. It gives us a data point to speak to. So what are the benefits? What are we going to get from measuring this? It's going to give us an understanding of what's going on the ground floor. And what we mean by that is it's a feedback loop. No one knows better than what goes on in your system of work than the people within the system, right? The people closest to the work. So it's going to act as a feedback loop. It's then going to provide you, and we've said this a number of times, we're going to continue saying it, it's going to provide you some evidence, some data, not an opinion, but some data coming from the people in the system to drive that strategic conversation, be able to identify where those gaps exist, talk about why we should think about changing it, and starting to really start about change management and running an experiment. The nice thing about this as well is it's quick. We don't have to sit around waiting for telemetry and all of our metrics to integrate and normalize and see the trends. This is something we can get fairly quickly, right? You can aggregate insights across teams. You can be able to spot trends, and this will give you that leading indicator, that signal before having to wait for metrics and data to actually come about, the lagging indicator. So this goes back to these qualitative measures being leading indicators that you can capture relatively quickly and use it to drive the conversations you need to drive to really make the change sticky. All right, well, okay, you talked a lot about, this is great, qualitative metrics, assessing the quality of, but how do I actually go about measuring it? We're going to talk a little bit about our behavioral signal assessment. I'm more or less going to talk about the approach. Again, I want you guys to walk away with something practical today, and it's really about this approach. And then if you wanted to try our platform, obviously, we'll talk a little bit about that later. So our behavior signals assessment, it's everything what you've just heard. It's lightweight. You can deploy it very quickly. It's evidence-based, right? It gathers evidence from the people doing the work, okay? And it's really all about being able to see, is the system reinforcing or undermining the behaviors we need to be able to be successful in 2025? Why? Because we don't want to sit around and wait for telemetry a lot of times, right? You don't have to implement plan view and wait 6 months before you start to get some meaningful metrics. Let's get some early warning signals. We work in very fast business environments now, right? We really require agility. Let's get the early warning signals now from the people doing the work. Who's it for? It's for transformation agents like you to drive the change. That is your job, right? Make people's lives better, customers' lives better, the business owners better, right? It's for any type of leader to be able to get clarity on what's constraining us from achieving our outcomes. What data do we need to drive conversations amongst the stakeholders to get alignment and be able to act, right? Metrics do a really good job at showing us what's going on. They don't always do a good job at showing us why. And so this is a good way to do that and be able to get information quickly. We've already talked about who provides the information. It's the people who live inside the system every day. And then from an approach, quite frankly, folks, You'll hear about quarterly assessments, semi-annually assessments, and surveys. You can do this at any time, right? It's it's an exercise that can happen at any time. There's never a bad time to reflect on where are we at today? Where do we want to go? Right? What do we need to do to achieve our goals? And putting an action plan in place to do that. So let's just briefly go through the behaviors that we include in our assessment. And then I'm going to show you an actual capability or a question that's presented to the participants to show you how we um, give them the perspective of them working within the system. So real fast, these are, after a ton of research, talking to a lot of folks, these are behaviors that every organization really needs, call them guiding behaviors, to be able to be successful in a very fast-moving VUCA world, right? And I'll just highlight some of these. Keep in mind the example of like value, flow, and delivery. That's just a set of behaviors. They're categorized. But for example, customer-centric. Uh, are you just assuming that you know the customer, or do you actually get feedback, right? Are you engaging the customer to understand what they're doing? That's a behavior that every organization needs, right? Flow control. How many organizations do we know continue to introduce new work just to slow everything down? Are you being disciplined to not introduce that work and actually focus on getting work done? That's what we're meaning and talking about when we talk about these types of behaviors. Are you measuring impact? I deliver something. Did it work? Did it add value? Right? Did new customers sign up? Priority alignment. Do you have the same priorities as I do across teams, across silos, etc.? Decision ownership. Do we know who makes decisions? Do they do it quickly? Is things escalated? So these are all things, again, that really need to be performed well in an organization. And then collaboration, role clarity, safety, skill development. Um, so this is how we actually drive these conversations. We look at these behaviors. And the way that we approach it is from a very qualitative perspective. And what we mean by that is, if you look here, this is a sample question within our behavior signal assessment. And the first thing I want to point out is we talk about, and this is an example for priority alignment, we talk about to what extent. So we're measuring the quality of this behavior, to what extent. And then we're very clear on what it is, our priorities clear and aligned. The next piece here is we talk about the good old user story format, right? So why is it important? This provides context to the participants of, right, like, why do we need to do this well? The next piece is the systems friction. So in the first stage of the survey question, and this is what's presented to the participants, we highlight the systems frictions. We're providing them that context and that lens so they can really think about their everyday job and what they do experience. So in the case of priority alignment, in that first things we talk about, no one really knows what the priorities are. There's not a shared understanding. We're not on the same page. It seems like everything is important, everything is urgent, and work struggles to even get done because of that. So we're painting the picture of that typical system friction for the participants to then put themselves and say, is this us? As we continue forward, we talk about alleviating that um, those systems frictions, the progress made, right? Hey, we're not where we used to be. We've made some progress. There is alignment. We do have priorities, but it always seems like something's urgent or we're introducing too much work. But we are taking steps to get better at that. Here's another example. So decision ownership. To what extent are decision rights clear and honored so that decisions are made quickly and supported across levels? What are the typical frictions that you see there? Well, we've all know that, a lot of times people don't know who makes the decision. Okay? Opinions multiply, escalations happen, and all as a result of these, this is delays. These are system frictions that we typically see when it comes to these types of behaviors, right? We know we need to be able to make decisions quickly, but the system creates frictions to achieve that. We want to get the feedback on how bad is this friction? And so that's why we're asking the question in this way, so that the data that comes out of here, really, everyone has the same perspective, and you can then point to it and say, here are some of the issues that people are experiencing. Lastly, good old flow control. We all know we introduce too much work, we put too many cars on the highway, and no one moves forward, right? To what extent is work in progress limited so that focus is high? This is the benefits. Work starts to get finished without unnecessary delay. What are the typical system frictions? We overcommit, right? We never say no, and we're constantly context switching. So when we do that, work gets stalled, nothing really finishes easily. And so you're putting that you're providing the context and the perspective so that participants can say, "Yep, that's us." Right? Ah, we're okay at this. Click. Again, be able to provide that calming understanding. So ultimately, and I'm going to show you the results and then we'll open it for questions. So what do you do with these results? Folks, we've said it a million times, but now you have data. And this is the feedback we get from our clients all the time with LAI is like, I now have the data to drive the conversation. Does that mean change is going to pursue, right? No, not necessarily, but at least you now have some evidence, right? And the more you can aggregate insights across different teams and be able to identify patterns, the more of a fighting chance you have to really get somebody's attention. Okay. This will allow you to target high impact improvements. Where can we deploy help? What can we tackle problems at scale? Where do we drive alignment across different leaders to be able to get aligned? It's the data that you can use again to drive that conversation. And then ultimately, you should be able to track your progress over time. Where are we focused? Can't focus on everything, but where are we focused? So let me just real briefly show you the results of LAI. So, and again, I don't want this to be a commercial, folks, but I just want to make the point. The way you can really push and make a dent and really drive those conversations is by looking at the patterns. And so within LAI, what you see here is the behavior signals assessment. You see a digital product operating group, right? And they're broken down by, call them journeys, capabilities, whatever you want, onboarding, payments, and reporting, and there's 3 teams underneath. When I click on one team, it will load the data for that one team. And if I am a scrum master or a coach or a leader for that team, that's probably my lens. But as I go up the stack and I click on onboarding, it's going to aggregate these 3 teams. Now I can see across this group, what's the common problem, right? We can see that a lot of these folks are really struggling in the value flow and delivery. Imagine that, right? You can see measuring impact is low, priority alignment is low. This is across all 3 teams. So I can now go into here and see what's the team that is struggling the most. This provides you patterns. It's a high level aggregation, and it starts to set the story and help you tell the narrative. You can imagine as you go all the way upward and you look at the digital product group as a whole, now again, I can now use this data to say, hey, we are just simply not good as an organization at measuring impact. We are simply not good at priority alignment. And when I drill down, I'll see my individual groups. And one thing I see here is like, wow, the payments group is a lot better than the reporting group. Where's the disconnect? Let's get these folks talking. What can they learn from one another? Maybe we need to spend more time with the reporting group. Okay. Maybe this isn't important to the reporting group. Okay. Context and outcomes, unique outcomes are different for everybody. But the point of all of this is really to think about driving the narrative, having some evidence, having people provide the feedback, and then being able to point to where are the system problems. Because remember, they're baked in. They're baked into the questions. We've done that purposely so that people can change agents can easily say that the root cause of a lot of these issues, because we all know this, is the system we work within. And unless we drive that change at that system level to get those behaviors on where they have to be, we'll continue to spin our wheels and not be able to achieve the business objectives. So that's all I have, folks. I'm going to hand it back off to Bob. We're going to put another poll up here, right, Bob? Let's go here. There you go.
Absolutely. So ultimately, so we have just created and recently, based on customer feedback and thoughts about an assessment that assesses the behaviors that we're talking about. And if you're interested, and somebody says no, but not at this moment, if it's remember, agility teaches us that no's are often not yet. So sometime in the future, we'd love to show you this. And the yes and another facilitation trick is that if you're interested in signing up, we'd love to have you. The process for this is fairly straightforward, and what I'll do is I will drop my meeting link into the chat for this Zoom. And as you know, grab 30 minutes with me. I'd love to connect with you and make sure that everything gets set up correctly. And so let me grab that off of my clipboard here and drop it into the chat. So grab like 30 minutes with me, 60 if you want a little bit more discussion. We'll make sure that your instance of LAI gets set up. My only request, the only commitment that I will ask for if you do this beta, just give me your feedback. Just give Mike and I your thoughts. We want to make this thing as awesome as possible. And signal from the market is always great. So, you know, there's no replacement for customer feedback. And so with that, I'd love to thank Mike. Thanks for presenting with. Thanks for the collaboration on both the deck, the presentation. I love doing these with you. It's super fun. So great session today. Thanks to Scott in the background who's been working some of our IT stuff, as well as Prima and the folks on our graphic design team to put together these phenomenal slides. Thanks to all the attendees. Thanks to all of you for showing up. Thanks for the great chat. And with that, I think, Mike, we've got 9 minutes. Let's do some questions. You want to have?
Yeah. I think that's great. So if you guys want to put any questions that you have in the chat, that would be appreciated. I just want to reiterate what Bob was saying. Thank you for attending today. I hope, if anything, you can take away something here that's practical. Start thinking about doing things maybe in a different way. It's not about purchasing our solution, but instead saying, hey, we do focus too much on process and technology. What is the behaviors that we're seeing that are not congruent to this way of working? And what are the root causes within the system that are going to achieve that? And ultimately, how can I spark conversations with the people that can change the system, which is leadership? And so that's kind of the thought process here, is being able to anchor a narrative to supporting data. Again, it does not mean they're going to act on it, but it gives you something more than just an opinion and subjective narrative. So thank you. If like Bob said, for the beta program, all we're asking for is your feedback. We want to continue to fine tune this so that it is something that's very valuable for folks and be able to make an impact in your organization, because they're dependent upon you.